Hello friends, for today's video I'm going to be going through a list of series that I either started this year or I kept up with this year that I do plan to continue on with. I'm not going to go in depth with the synopses for these today. If you are interested in hearing my thoughts about them more in depth, then I will have videos where I have discussed them in the description bar down below. I am going to go through these relatively quickly though, because I did pick up a lot of things that I quite liked. I would say this year, this is not gonna turn into a big long introduction. I was just gonna say that there were a couple of series I read and completed this year that have turned out to be new favorites. As a result, I definitely feel like a lot of this year I was kind of riding the high of those, but then also sitting in this space of like, why is nothing as good as these? I thought in my head that like, I guess I'm just not finding anything I like. But then when I was reflecting on a lot of the series that I picked up that I definitely want to keep going with, I was like, oh no, there's some good stuff in here. It's just, it's almost not fair to compare everything, especially the first book in a series, to trilogies that you've completed and fallen head over heels in love with. So I'm fully aware that it's not fair to think that they're the same. But the point is, I'm continuing on with these stories. So let's jump into it. The first couple are self-published works, and I did this year make an effort to pick up more self-pub books, and not only that, but have dedicated videos to those, so I'll have those linked. But the three that I'm going to mention first would be Rise of the Ranger, Ascendant, and Emperor's Edge. These are all fairly different from one another. The first two, I would say, are definitely drawing more so from some classic fantasy things and then putting their own spin on them. One is definitely very much sort of the classic fantasy races, like you have dwarves and elves, and the things that go along with those are the things that we think of when we think of those fantasy races. Those are definitely present in this story, but as I said, you do have so much about the world and so much about the characters that are their own unique original thing. With Ascendant, I've talked about this one quite a bit this year just because I feel like so many different people would enjoy this story, but it is kind of a boy and his dragon setup. And then the one that's probably the most unique would be Emperor's Edge, as this one is more so almost like Gaslamp fantasy. And I do hope to very soon kind of go in depth with steampunk and gaslamp fantasy, so I'm looking forward to diving into more of those things and having a better awareness of what differentiates those subgenres from one another and what I think makes something stand out within those types of worlds. But this one was just fun, kind of adventurous, and it's not necessarily very serious. I would say it has fun with its story. It moves very quickly. It's very, very accessible. But I thought it was fun, and I've heard that the series gets better and better as it goes from one of my friends. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it progresses, because that one and Rise of the Ranger both are parts of very long series. I have continued with Rise of the Ranger, I've continued with Ascendant, and Emperor's Edge I haven't yet continued on with, but I hope to in 2025. That's my plan. And with all of these, I'm planning to continue on with them. Next up, we have Howl's Moving Castle. I know that I do not have the unpopular opinion, I don't think, in finding that I enjoyed the film more than the book itself, and they're quite different from one another. But I would be curious to see where the rest of the story goes within the book, as the film it ends and it's complete, and the book ends in a way where you can just read the first one if you want, but I definitely want to see the rest of that story. I would be very curious to know what the source material does with these characters moving forward and this world. After that, we have one that I feel like maybe it's a surprise that it's on this list, but to be fair, when I read it, I did say I feel like to properly review this, at least in the context of the video that it was within, I felt like I would need to keep going with this series, and that would be Captive Prince. And okay, I read this within a video where I dedicated the whole video to reading and reviewing fantasy romance books, specifically ones that had been suggested to me by all of you. And I said when I was giving the prompt of like, hey, what should I read? I said it can be things you think I would like. It could be things that you just want more information on, and maybe I'm like your guinea pig to figure out if it would be something that you would like or not. And also, if you think I would hate it, you can recommend it as well. But the point when I was doing that video was that I was going to be trying to weigh in on whether or not I feel that the books are more appealing to fantasy readers, whether they're more appealing to romance/fantasy romance readers. Do I feel they're a great hybrid of the two? And my thing with Captive Prince was I was like, it is, as far as romance goes within the first book, a complete and utter failure because there's not a romance in the first book. Is there attraction between characters? Is it pretty obvious who the characters are going to end up with? Yeah, but it doesn't have a romance in the first book. Plus, I personally would say that I consider this to be grimdark. Maybe the entirety of the series turns into dark fantasy, or no, not dark fantasy, dark fantasy romance, maybe. I don't know. That's the thing. I feel I can't properly review it in the way that would be helpful to readers, so I kind of feel like I should keep going. We'll see how that goes. Let's move on. Next up, we have, let's keep in line with the books I read within that video. So I do plan to keep going with Spark of the Everflame. That one, I was quite surprised because I feel like, actually, in a way, it kind of fits similar things to what I was saying about Captive Prince, not entirely, but the idea that within the first book, you don't really get significant romance within the plot because it would seem that the romance is going to be a slow burn across the series. But that did mean that the world and the fantasy elements kind of got to shine, which I was a fan of. So I'm looking forward to continuing on, and I hope that those things don't take a backseat once the romance becomes a bigger part of it. I don't dislike romance. I just, in my fantasy romance that I've picked up, I prefer when there's a good blend of the two. And speaking of a good blend of the two, I do plan to continue on with Reign and Ruin. That's the name of the first book. I'd have to double check. Mages of the Wheel, I believe, is the name of the series. I do plan to continue on with this. I felt it was great as far as its mix of both political fantasy and fantasy romance. It really, truly felt like a hybrid of the two. Next up, we have The Will of the Many. I'm sure if you consume BookTube even somewhat regularly, especially fantasy-leaning BookTube, you've heard about The Will of the Many, as a lot of people have fallen head over heels for this one. I did find that the first entry had a lot of elements to it that I was really fascinated by. And when I was first starting it, I was like, okay, I can see why people are really, really invested in this. And then the parts that were really unique that I wanted to dive into more, we kind of set aside, and then we did a reconnaissance type of storyline, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But I think as a result, and it's not just that one simple thing, there's a lot of additional details that go into this. But as a result, a lot of people have mentioned that it feels quite similar to other works that utilize this sort of plot line. Specifically, a lot of people have compared it to Red Rising. I don't disagree with those comparisons, but I did feel like if you took Red Rising and you meshed it more with fantasy, then you would have something that was like The Will of the Many. And I love that idea because I like Red Rising. If you tell me, like, what if Red Rising was sci-fantasy rather than just science fiction, which you could argue there are fantasy elements to Red Rising, kind of. But anyway, the point is, if you're like, what if it was more fantasy, though? I'd be like, oh my gosh, give it to me now. But I did feel like those really unique elements that were making The Will of the Many stand out initially at the beginning, like I said, they sort of took a backseat for us to focus on this other plot line. And I'm hoping that with the rest of the series, based off of where the first book ends especially, that the fantasy elements maybe will come to the forefront a lot more. And then I can potentially see myself falling in love with the series as much as everybody else has. But right now I'm kind of like, I don't know, we'll see. That first book alone has it's piqued my interest, but I wouldn't say it's absolutely hooked me. From there, we have two stories that are sort of detective stories, very different from one another. One of them would be The Tainted Cup, and then the other one would be The God and the Gumiho. The God and the Gumiho you could read and then just read that first book and be done. In fact, the way it reads, I probably would have thought it was a standalone if not for the fact that it's already been said to be the first book in a series. The way it ends, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see that we could open additional plot lines up. But we also could just kind of end it there if somebody didn't really want to keep going with it. This one is so campy. If you pick this one up, just know that it's going to be absolutely ridiculous. The characters are really over the top. And at first it like kind of slightly irked me, and then it sort of grew on me, and then I found it entertaining. So this one, though, I could see being very hit or miss for people. As I said at the beginning, I'll have videos where I go more in depth about all of these, but this is one where for a while I was like, and then that kind of turned into like, oh, haha. And then I will say I kind of was amused by it. And then with the Tainted Cup, very different sort of detective setup with a really fascinating, cool world. And I loved the world. I want to see more of it. I think that the little, maybe not even critiques, because it's not a matter of like, this is what I think would have made it better. But the things that didn't quite work for me, I don't think are negatives at all. It was just simply the nature of what this book was, which is an investigative story. And as a result, that means we did kind of move along relatively quickly. And I wanted more character interactions, but I think that would have really slowed down the pacing, especially because some of it wasn't even a matter of character interactions. I also just wanted characters to sort of sit and reflect on things from time to time. So, and then I could kind of like get to know them more, you know? And not that I think the characterization is bad by any means. I'm not saying that, but I do feel like it moved very quick, which was good. And I feel that's probably ultimately actually a positive for the pacing and a lot of people that pick this book up. But that's what I mean by when I say I don't actually think the things that didn't quite work perfectly for me are bad things. I think it's just the nature of the story. But that said, I still really liked so much of this. I almost feel like I made it sound like I'm not continuing on with it, which is now obviously the situation. I am very excited to continue on with it, and I do hope we get more of those things as we move forward. And I feel like there's the potential for the world to actually become huge, which is kind of, if that is the situation, the way, maybe I shouldn't say the world, maybe I should say the stakes. But if that is what ends up happening, I think starting with a very relatively contained investigation and then branching out into really epic stakes throughout the rest of the series could be a pretty cool way to introduce people to the world, because it gets you sort of settled in and the bigger stuff is sort of in the background and then it comes to the front a little bit more as you progress through the series. I like that idea. I hope that's what ends up happening. I also could see it just being like another mystery, which would be okay. I just don't know if that's quite what I want it to be, because I really want to get more of that world. It's really cool. Anyway, I'm going to move on. After that, we have Murderbot. I don't think I need to elaborate too much on this. I like Murderbot. It's a fun break between other things, and also there's something like kind of cathartic about reading about this being who gets depressed and bummed out and feels the need to help humans, but also doesn't really feel like humans are practical or logical or make very good decisions, and you're just like, yeah, exactly. After that, we have Emily Wilde. I did read the second book, Map of the Otherlands. I felt it was a little too similar in certain ways to the first book. I still really enjoyed it, though. I'm hoping that the third book, which I believe will be the final book in this, so it'll be a trilogy, I'm hoping that it does something a little different, so it doesn't feel like we kind of followed the same blueprint. I still love this series, though. I think it's so fun, and it's charming, and it's silly, and it's also kind of grim at times, but I quite enjoy it, and I'm really looking forward to, based off where things end in the second book, really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen in the third book. I kind of feel like where things ended in the first book, I thought we were going to get those things in the second, and then we kind of didn't, and now I'm like, okay, I think we're going to get those things in the third book. We'll see. After that, we have The Spell Shop. This one, I almost don't know that I should consider it a series, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to work, but I know there's another book coming out that is in this world, and the cover's already been released. It has a similar look and feel to the first one. I have to double check, though, if it's just going to be another standalone in that world, or if it's going to be a direct sequel. I don't think it's a direct sequel, but I will double check. Regardless, I plan to continue on, because The Spell Shop did something that I would love from more cozy fantasy, which is that it wasn't just sweet and charming and cute with found family and all the things that are making cozy fantasy so loved, but it also had a really creative, fun world. And so I personally would be very happy if Sarah Beth Durst kind of just dropped in and made more stories within this world from time to time. I think that would be a lot of fun, so I'm really glad to see that there's going to be another. Spin of Fate would be the next series. This first book, every time I've brought it up, I've mentioned that it was extremely unique. It is young adult. I think it's a young adult story that's world building, not only matches a lot of the complexity you see in adult fantasy world building, but in a lot of ways surpasses a lot of what we get in adult fantasy, because of course not every world is extremely fleshed out in adult fantasy, and also not all of them are even epic or huge. I was just talking about The Spell Shop, and it is a little more contained. So this one, though, I feel is, as I said, it's on par with the complexities that you see in the ones when you think of really cool worlds or really cool magic systems. Spin of Fate has that. And it being YA, I feel like definitely makes it very accessible. It's a story that, depending on, of course, where the series goes, but just based off that first book, I could see it being a really great entry point for people that are maybe looking to get into high fantasy, who maybe feel a little daunted by some of the things like Storm My Archive that are truly epic in scale. I could see this being kind of a really great welcoming stepping stone, because it doesn't shy away from really throwing you in and having the magic play a big role and having the religion play a role in things and how all of it's intertwined and mixed in together. I think that was really cool. Plus, I thought that the characters were well done. In general, I look forward to continuing on with this one. That was a new fantasy release. Another additional new fantasy release that I'm hoping to continue on with would be of Jaden Dragons. This is another one that is young adult fantasy, and I think when I reviewed it, I mentioned that I personally think if I had picked it up as a teenager, like a young teenager, 14-ish or so, that I think I would have really found it so cool, because I don't remember, at least when I was that age, getting too many steampunk and silkpunk fantasy works, and I really feel it utilized that setting quite well. I thought that the plotline of there being kind of this almost kind of school/trials setting was something that it continuously made the plot move forward, but also there's personal stakes for the character, so then you have that connection to her. I just in general thought it was a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing what the next book brings. After that, we have Cant Spell Treason Without Tea. This is another one that first book is like kind of a standalone, and the next book I think will continue on and maybe have some people from the first one. I'm not entirely sure just yet, but I did feel like the first one was very cute. Again, cozy fantasy, so it has the things that you would typically expect, the ingredients that you find in a lot of cozy fantasy, and I do think that it'll be fun to see what the next one brings, especially as a nice sort of palate cleanser between the bigger works. That I think is one of the fun things about cozy fantasy. After that, we have, I'm forgetting, Wisteria, I believe is the third book's title. I don't know, within 2024 it's possible I'll have read that one by the end of the year. But as I'm recording these before the year is officially up, I will either have it complete by the end of the year, or it will be something that I continue on with and complete sometime in 2025. I really quite liked the first book. The second book did sort of follow some other characters and had the characters from the first one, so it sort of just like broadened it, but it by no means is what I've been describing about, series of standalones. It was still a sequel, just kind of shifted perspectives a little bit. And then I don't know quite what to expect with the third one, but I kind of think I don't kind of think I know. I liked the first one more. So I'm hoping that the third one will sort of bring everything home, and that maybe some of everything that's been building will have a great conclusion. That's it though for some fantasy series that I plan to continue on with. As I said before, I will have links to all of the reviews I've done for these in the description bar, as well as links to check these books out for yourself if they are ones that you've been kind of having your eye on and you want to give them a go. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.